Good morning if you are in NA, good afternoon if you're in Europe, good evening if you are in Asia. Today we have our weekly recap of raid encounters and the raid meta and how it's been going for all the specs after yet another week. This is gonna be a little bit more spicy because we are also being told that in a couple of days or even tomorrow in NA there is going to be the balance tuning hitting primarily Destruction Warlock. We are getting some very minor / barely noticeable buffs to Guardian Druid and to Vengeance, a presumably not that important buff to Affliction Warlock, and the main talk is going to be, of course, how much we are going to see Destruction Warlock getting affected by their nerf, right? So for this week of raiding, how things have been going. Now, the first thing to check, as usual, is the popularity of the specs. It's worth noting that, once again, Destruction Warlock remains at the top of the popularity. This is what's going to be interesting to see by the end of next week, even if it's going to be enough to see perhaps Destruction Warlock losing grounds. Now, Destruction is gapping quite largely every other spec except for balance. You can see the difference between Destro and Havoc, the third spec in line. It's almost 50%, so it's gonna take a while before any other spec other than balance will overtake Destruction in popularity. To be fair, Destruction is in the same class of Demonology and even, sure, Affliction, so it's much easier for Warlock players to just wiggle around in between the same specs of the same class. Talking about much faster, Beast Mastery continues as an example of how easy it can be to change between the same class. Beast Mastery continues to rise in popularity in the raid, almost matching and almost passing Marksmanship Hunter. Perhaps by next week we're gonna see the complete surpass of Beast Mastery over Marksmanship. We also see Survival. We might see the day where all three Hunter specs will be right next to each other in the popularity of Mythic, because Survival is now passing. It passed Frost DK last week, and now it passed Frost Mage this week. So it's now broken into the 14,000 range, reaching the 15,000, now targeting Demo and Fire. There is quite a significant gap there as well, however, and also it's likely that Demo might gain some more popularity now that Destruction has gotten nerfed. So perhaps the dream of seeing all three Hunter specs next to each other in popularity won't quite happen anytime soon. As a side note, I just wanted to spend 30 seconds to talk about Heroic popularity because I was confused by that thing right there. What's that pink doing in the top 5 of popularity in Heroic raids? Why is Ret so high? I can understand Beast Mastery because Hunters are always super popular. Of course, other popular specs in Mythic are still popular in Heroic, like Destruction, like Havoc, like Fury, Survival, Frost Mage, Balanced Druid, but I'm not quite sure what is Ret doing there. So perhaps some of you Heroic players used to seeing many Rets apparently, or Ret players yourself who have been into Heroic that often, can explain to me this mystery of Ret Paladin being so high in popularity, in performance of Heroic. The other two roles don't change that much in terms of popularity. As usual, Blood and Brewmaster are very, very popular, and then the other 4 tanks are not as popular. You know, you can put Prot Paladin, Vengeance, Guardian and Protection Warrior all together and they will have a lower number than the second most popular tank, Brewmaster. So this has been the to-go situation in tanks for quite a while at this point, so nothing too surprising. More or less the same can be said for healers, where Holy Priest is once again the highest in popularity by a wide margin. It is perhaps I would say, I haven't gone back to check precisely, but I believe it is the largest gap we have seen in this expansion in terms of popularity between healers. It's almost twice as much as the second best Restoration Shaman. That's quite a large margin. And also, as a result, Discipline is at its lowest that it has been, not just from this expansion, but from all the other expansions pretty much, since Discipline has historically been more popular than Holy Priest, at the very least since Cataclysm to now. So definitely this is one of the new records of low popularity for Discipline. When we go and look at the actual performance, however, we do see, once again, this will be interesting to see once the nerfs go through to Destruction, to see how it's gonna play out, because Destruction, as you can see, it is not only still the spec at the top, but also at the top by a decent margin in terms of maximum results in fights. It is followed up by specs we have seen before already: Frost Decay, Survival, the two Shaman specs, Windwalker, Outlaw, Rogue is the new outlier we have pointed out before. After the buffs to Outlaw, they have grown significantly, and at the same time as Outlaw grew, we also had Subtlety Rogue right down here as the spec that fell down of the Rogue specs. We have once again the no surprise situations of, for example, Balanced Druid being the absolute bottom of specs. We have all of the mage specs being towards the bottom half. So the situation has not changed too much for the specs that have not received changes. Pretty much, we have seen the growth of arms, which is now middle of the pack from the bottom that it was before, once it was buffed in 9.2.5, Windwalker was buffed and Outlaw was buffed. So all of these specs and their buffs in this patch have given them better results, I would say. Of course, as usual, this is going to change based on the fight. For example, you can go, instead of looking at all bosses, you can go and look at Skolex, which is a pure single target fight, so you have no way to multi-target in any way possible, and you can see, for example, that Destro, the currently best performing spec in the raid, in a pure single target fight is very, very low. Another spec that performs very well right now is Survival, and this is where Survival is. Frost and Windwalker are also very well performing, and they are at the absolute bottom. Funnily enough, other specs also performing much less in the overall, like Shadow Priest, like Fire Mage, like Frost Mage, like BM Hunter after the buffs, are all at the top. Once you go back to the overall, this is where Frost is, this is where Beast Mastery is, this is Fire, this is Shadow Priest. So you can see that it can change a lot also based on the damage profile. For example, you're going to have fights like Halonjus, which is going to be a pure single target fight. You're going to have a fight like Anduin, which is going to be a multi-target fight for a long duration, for a long portion of the encounter. You have Lords of Dread, which is a pure 2-target or even 3-target fight with the add that constantly spawns, and you can multi-dot and whatnot, and you can see that specs like Destro once again go up a lot compared to before, and the pure single-target specs go back to doing much less. For example, Assassination, Elemental, Feral are all the way down to the bottom. We can go back up to a fight like Rigelon, which is much more single target heavy, and once again you have Feral Druid, Shadow Priest, Elemental going all the way up to the top. So it depends on damage profile, which is why it's gonna be interesting to see Destruction, which continues to overperform, as you can see, in almost all of the fights, because they almost have a trick. They have a way to overperform in whatever fight, whether it is Havoc and double target Chaos Bolts, whether it is AoE, whether it is a particular AoE phase which allows them to pad a lot of damage. They always seem to end up with a very high performance in most of these bosses we have seen. Not for last, we have the Jailer, which is the more single target out of all the fights. You have pretty much a constant single target situation, except for when the mind controlled allies get mind controlled in phase 2, and the short, very short single spawn of a bunch of adds in phase 3. Those are the only times any other target is going to be available to be hit. So for the most part, it is single target, which is why in the top you see Feral, you see Shadow Priest, and you see Assassination Rogue. Pure single target specs. As I said, it's going to be interesting to see just how much this is going to affect Destruction. Perhaps it might affect a little bit Affliction, maybe some Disillusion Destruction Warlocks in Protest, in Strike will go back to playing Affliction instead of Demonology, which is plenty viable right now, but it's gonna be more interesting to see the damage this will cause to Destruction, because we have seen that Destro has gotten its single target buffed as a countermeasure to the AoE nerf it received, but still that is very likely not gonna change anything. It is very likely that because the Blasphemy was doing so much, even in single target, that the nerfs to the Blasphemy working with Reign of Chaos is actually going to be a net DPS loss, even in single target, despite the single target buffs that Destruction has received. Also, this has been the first week, we can go and check a little bit the first week after the severe set of nerfs that several bosses have received at the top end. We have gotten Lehovim, Alonjus, Anduin, Rigelon, and Jailer all giga nerfed this reset, so we can start seeing the impact of the nerfs right here, comparing them to the last week or a couple of weeks ago, and how much higher All of the bosses have grown in kill chance. Most of the others have started to grow. You know, Rygadon has gotten out of the 3% barrier. I believe by next week, Alondrus will also get out of the 3% barrier, so we will only have 2 bosses below the 3% chance to kill, Anduin and the Jailer, by that point. With that being said, we have looked at the situation for the raid in today's recap video. I think, you know, I'm starting to look at these type of things because, as I said, I was preparing to play an extra character for Season 4, perhaps a different main as well. So I wanted to, you know, to start analyzing possible shifts in the meta, possible movements in the charts, in the rankings of who is growing, who is rising, who is falling. Of course, this is still going to be pending any possible balance tuning we will be getting in Season 4. Of course, we have just gotten a round of balance tuning, right? Literally tomorrow we will get one, but it's more likely that was some sort of emergency change that Blizzard pulled out. It's definitely not what you expect as the pre-patch balance tuning that you usually get. Usually those are much larger, they are much bigger. Perhaps they start touching even things like talents, even things like core mechanics of a spec. So that's what I'm hoping for before we get into Season 4. I want to see some shakeup, I want to see some changes in particular, because the Season 4 is going to be in the name of recycling, right? It's going to be reusing, reprogressing all of the 3 previous raid tiers. It's going to be a season with a few older dungeons. So I'm hoping that we can get into those with a different meta, right? That's my hope. I'm hoping that we can start seeing, for example, different specs we haven't seen before being much more considered, right? I would enjoy it, of course, it doesn't affect me, but I would enjoy it if I could go into a raid and see a bunch of Red Paladins, Unholy Death Knights, Feral Druids, Elemental Shamans, Shadow Priests, for example, rather than seeing the same old stack of Warlocks. If it's not a stack of Warlocks, then it's a stack of Mages, and if it's not a stack of Mages, it's a stack of Hunters over and over. I would like to see some variety for the last patch of this expansion, so I'm keeping up the monitoring of the raid, mostly as a hopium take to wish we can start to see some changes as we approach Season 4. We have had our timeline prediction, our schedule prediction for 2022, and in my own prediction I think Season 4 is bound to come out within roughly a month from now, basically end of July. So I hope that we are starting to get some news about incoming balance tuning for that season. That is my wish for the last tier, the last season of this expansion. With this being said, we can stop. We can take a break for this recap raid video of today. Thank you, of course, guys, for watching the video and for helping to grow the channel in any way you can, which includes liking and commenting down below for very little effort, honestly. And then also you can subscribe as well. This one being a raid team video, I would say everyone above this level of performance in the raid is allowed to subscribe. I'm sorry normies down here, you are too low for me to consider. I'm also available, of course, on Twitter down in this direction, and you can support me even more by subscribing to my Patreon down at this Eisenart name over here. That would be greatly appreciated. Thank you guys again. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I mean, I feel bad for you, okay? I feel bad for you, but, you know, it's gonna make me feel bad. If someone were to look at my channel and say, oh man, this guy has an arcane mage subscribed to his channel. Yuck.